Dr. Bala Mukesh is currently Professor of Pulmonary Medicine, Christian Medical College, Vellore, and Clinical Epidemiology and Radiology Chair, Report Consortium, Indo-US Collaboration for TB Research. He completed his internal medicine training at PJ Aimer, Chandigarh, following which he has completed his DM in Pulmonary and Critical Care Medicine. He is a Fellow of American College of Chest Physicians since January 2008. He is a recipient of the Indian Council for Medical Research Award in recognition for significant contributions for biomedical research, Srimati Kamal Sakbir Award. He has numerous publications in both national and international journals. He is a prolific researcher and an exemplary physician. He will give us an overview on pulmonary fibrosis.
I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss about pulmonary fibrosis in COVID era. I bring greetings to you from Department of Pulmonary and Respiratory Medicine, Christian Medical College, Vellore. The outline of my talk will be like this. I'll be briefly discussing about the diagnosis and management of idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. I'll be subsequently talking about lung fibrosis due to coronaviruses in general, lung fibrosis due to COVID-19, evidence thus far, and what can we do. As you all know, fibrosis in any organ system is as a consequence of disordered wound healing process. Usually, there is a well-defined inciting event. Sometimes we cannot identify the inciting event. This inciting event results in inflammation, which can be acute and self-limiting, or it can be chronic. This results in alveolar damage, alveolar epithelial damage, and results in overexpression of pro-inflammatory cytokines, TGF-beta, TNF-alpha. This results in fibroblasts and myofibroblasts activation, subsequently resulting in excess deposition of collagen in extracellular matrix, resulting in pulmonary fibrosis. American Thoracic Society, a couple of years back, put out this clinical practice guideline, how to diagnose a patient with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. The first criteria is you need to exclude other known causes of interstitial lung disease like domestic and occupational environmental exposure, connective tissue disease, and drug toxicity. And we need to do appropriate targeted investigation to rule out each one of these, because the management will depend if there is a well-identified inciting cause. If we are able to rule out known causes of ILD, then we have to satisfy one of these criteria. The first one is presence of typical high-resolution CT scan pattern of UIP. UIP means usual interstitial pneumonia. If the typical HRCT pattern is not there, then you need to have a specific combination of HRCT patterns and histology patterns in patients subjected to lung tissue sampling. What are the typical HRCT patterns of UIP, usual interstitial pneumonia? They need to have subpleural and basal predominant involvement. The distribution can be heterogeneous, is often heterogeneous, and there is honeycombing with or without peripheral traction bronchiectasis or bronchioliectasis. So the honeycombing is pathognomonic feature of UIP pattern of ILD or IPF. And this honeycombing is usually subpleural and basal. If honeycombing is not present, but the rest of the features are there, then you call it as a probable UIP pattern. There are some features which are atypical for a UIP pattern of fibrosis, and these include This marked mosaic attenuation, predominant ground glass opacities, profuse micronodules, centrilobular nodules, consolidation, or a peribronchovascular, perilymphatic distribution, and upper or mid-lobe involvement. An example is seen in this CT scan picture where there is predominant ground glassing and there is absence of honeycombing and there is areas of air trapping. Such features are there, then you should think that it is not idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. So if you have a patient suspected to have an IPF, you need to find out potential cause and associated conditions. If it is there, you have to do evaluation to confirm these causes. And if you find it, you have to base your management depending on this, and it is not IPF. If you could not find a potential cause, you do a HRCT. If the HRCT is typical of UIP pattern, you discuss in an MDD, multidisciplinary discussion. And if the team agrees, you make a diagnosis of IPF. If the CT picture is not typical of UIP, but it's a probable UIP, indeterminate or alternative diagnosis, again, you discuss in the multidisciplinary discussion. And then you decide whether you need to do a BAL or whether you need to do a biopsy. Suppose if it is suggestive of sarcoidosis, you can do a medial lymph node sampling or a transbronchial lung biopsy, and then you will reach an alternative diagnosis. How will you manage a patient with IPF, idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis? The treatment is mainly supportive. Oxygen therapy, if the patient is a candidate for long-term oxygen therapy, the typical indications for other chronic lung disease like COPD applies to IPF as well. Pulmonary rehabilitation plays a very crucial role in management of such patients to improve their quality of life. Vaccination, influenza and pneumococcal vaccination as appropriate. And a significant number of them will continue to have progressive and debilitative symptoms, and palliative care plays an important role in management of such individuals. Coming to specific medical therapy, about a decade back, steroids, immunosuppressive treatments played a crucial role in the management, but now there are adequate studies to prove that immunosuppressive treatment, N-acetylcysteine, has no role. In fact, they may harm the prognosis of patients. GERD has been found to be beneficial. Treatment of GERD has been found to be beneficial. So you need to find out if they have symptoms, and even if they don't have symptoms, empirical treatment is warranted. Antifibrotics, the role has been increasingly recognized. Pirfenidone is an antifibrotic agent, and it decreases the fibrogenesis at the alveolar level. Nintedanib is a newer agent which has been also found to act at the alveolar level at reducing the worsening fibrosis. This is a phase 3 trial of pirfenidone in patients with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. And I just want to highlight that what these agents do is reduction in the fall in FVC or forced vital capacity. As compared to placebo, pirfenidone causes a reduction in the fall in FVC. Similarly, progression-free survival. What we are aiming is not improvement. What we are aiming is stability of the disease or prevent further worsening or reduce the velocity by which the FVC falls down. There are multiple trials comparing pirfenidone, nintedanib with the placebo, and this is a meta-analysis of 10 trials, and the important primary endpoints being the decline in percent predicted FVC fall more than 10%. So FVC fall more than 10% over a period of 6 months or 1 year is considered as significant disease progression. So when This is considered both pirfenidone and nintedanib has a beneficial effect with the odds ratio being 0.54, and which is statistically significant. And there is nothing much to compare between pirfenidone and nintedanib. When it comes to acute exacerbations and mortality, yes, there is a trend to improvement in both these, pirfenidone and nintedanib, but the confidence interval is crossing 1, so we are not absolutely sure that whether any of these will have an effect on mortality or acute exacerbation. What about number needed to benefit and number needed to harm? For both pirfenidone and nintedanib, you need to treat 9 patients for it to have a beneficial effect on 1. Number needed to benefit is 9. Number needed to harm, as measured as number of dropouts while on treatment, it is more for nintedanib. That is 14 as compared to 12 in pirfenidone. That suggests that slightly the pirfenidone has a better safety profile and compliance. So as a standard of care in suitable patients, we currently use pirfenidone. Nintedanib, the major drawback in our setting is its high cost, but recently generic versions have been introduced in market, and we hope to use them more often. Nintedanib has also been found to be beneficial in progressive fibrosis interstitial lung disease, non-UIP pattern, like other fibrosing diseases like chronic hypersensitivity pneumonitis, autoimmune ILD, like scleroderma related ILD, idiopathic NSIP, unclassifiable idiopathic interstitial lung disease. And these conditions, when there is progressive fibrosis, again, nintedanib has been found to be beneficial. And this is early data. It is a subset analysis of other studies. So, having known the progressive, relentlessly progressing fibrosis in other conditions, nintedanib can be tried when we don't have any other option. Coming to post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis, the early evidence comes from other coronaviruses like SARS-1 or MERS. The SARS-1, which happened in early 2003 and 2004, and this is a study of follow-up of such patients for nearly a year. Out of 383 clinically diagnosed SARS patients, after a follow-up of 1 year, they found out that 1/4 of them had lung diffusion abnormalities as defined by DLCO less than 80%. And 21.5% of them exhibited lung fibrotic changes. And when they did serial follow-up at 2, 4, 6, and 11 months, they found out that the vital capacity serially improved and reached a near normal value. The DLCO, it also showed improvement, but it didn't reach normal values. And SARS-1 patients have been followed up for a period of 15 years, and this study looked at that, and they found out that the lung lesions, the pulmonary lesions, showed improved recovery in the initial 1 year. From 2003 to 2004, there is a rapid decline in the incidence of pulmonary lesions. And after that, it remained stable till the last follow-up of 2018. When they looked at the pulmonary function also improved dramatically in the initial years. And after that, it remained stable. The pulmonary function in 2018 was basically same as 2006 with mildly impaired diffusion function. So both these studies have shown that in the initial 1 year, there is improvement in the lung function, improvement in the fibrosis as seen radiologically. And after that, it remains stable over a long period of time with minimal impairment in diffusion capacity. In the MERS coronavirus, again, we have a shorter follow-up study of 43 days in which they found out that 1/3 of them have lung fibrosis. So when the COVID-19 struck the world, and there was a lot of concern what it is going to do for the lung function. And this is one of the early papers published in Lancet Respiratory Medicine in March. And they made the comment, given the large number of individuals affected by COVID-19, even rare complications will have major health effects at the population level, which we started to see in the recent few months. This is an example of a patient which was admitted in our hospital, 46-year-old gentleman with COVID ARDS, he was admitted in 25th of September. He was hypoxic. He required a prolonged hospital stay of nearly 3 weeks. He received non-invasive ventilation in our intensive care unit, and his chest X-ray, even after 2 weeks, showed significant bilateral shadows. His CT scan has shown that there is significant areas of fibrosis and ground glass opacities even after 3 weeks of illness. He was sent home on short-term oxygen therapy. And he came to our OPD about a week back. And this is an X-ray comparison which showed the chest X-ray when he was acutely ill and the most recent X-ray. This shows that there is significant resolution of the bilateral lung shadows. Still, he has been left with minor fibrotic bands in bilateral lung fields. And he has been commenced on pulmonary rehabilitation. His oxygenation, since he has been improved, we have discontinued oxygen. So this study is one of the earlier studies from Wuhan, the epicenter of the pandemic, where they followed up 149 patients. They did CT scans weekly, first week, second week, and third week after discharge. And they found out that predictably at discharge, the predominant finding is ground glass opacity. And that significantly improved as the weeks go by. The fibrosis was also present, and they also progressively improved by third week. This is an abstract presentation in European Respiratory Congress about a couple of months back, when they looked at pulmonary impairment in those with severe COVID infection. This is from Austria. At 6 weeks, nearly 45% of them had breathlessness, and they continued to improve, and a lesser percentage had breathlessness 12 weeks after discharge. Similarly, lung function impairment was present nearly 1/4 of the patients, which continued to improve at 12 weeks. And the pathological CT findings were present in majority of the patients at 6 weeks, and it was present in around half of them by 12 weeks. And what this showed that patients who had severe COVID illness, majority of them had abnormalities on the CT scan. A lesser proportion, but a significant proportion of them had breathlessness as their symptom, but these continue to improve as weeks go by. What about those with non-critical illness? And this study looked at 3-month follow-up after recovery of non-critical illness. Again, radiological abnormalities were present in 71% of them. And the most common CT features including ground glass opacity, interstitial thickening, and crazy payment. And lung function abnormalities were found in 1/4 of them, although they had non-critical illness. So lung function abnormalities at 3 months were present in 1/4 of them, and high D-dimer at admission was associated with reduced diffusion capacity. What about critically ill patients requiring invasive ventilation? And this is a series from France. After post-extubation, these patients, 19 of them, were serially followed up with 6 minutes walk distance. And as you all know, it is a measurement of exercise limitation or a disability. And they also gave pulmonary rehabilitation. So they did pulmonary rehabilitation as soon as they were extubated, and then they serially did weekly 6-minute walk distance. And as you can know, all of them had very significantly impaired exercise capacity at baseline soon after extubation. But there is significant improvement in all of them as weeks go by. And they also found out that earlier you start the rehabilitation, the better the improvement in 6-minute walk distance. So they concluded is rehabilitation, although it is not a blinded study, it is not ethical to withhold rehabilitation to a group of people. Early rehabilitation improves the exercise capacity in critically ill COVID patients. And we had some recommendations also, this how to follow up such patients. In mild to moderate pneumonia, Peter George et al., they recommend that we need to have a 12-week chest X-ray, and if it is abnormal, you do pulmonary function test. And depending on the abnormalities, you take further action. In those who were treated in ICU or HDU, you need to have a telephonic consultation at 4 to 6 weeks, and at 12 weeks, you need to have a chest X-ray and pulmonary function test. And then depending on the abnormalities, you do further investigations like CT scan or CT3A. What we drew in our departments, we drew up a schedule of how to follow up these patients. And what is crucial is early rehabilitation. When a patient is being discharged from hospital, at that time itself, or even when the patient is getting ready to discharge, one is out of the critical illness, we need to motivate the patients to start exercising, to start walking. And WHO has come up with a very good booklet, Support for Rehabilitation, Self-Management After COVID-19 Related Illness, which covers a whole lot of aspects of their disability, which is related to their breathlessness, which are related to their psychological well-being. So it's a good booklet to go through it and adapt to our situation. And we also adapted from this booklet about a home exercise program. We are trying to make it available to our patients when they are getting discharged. And so earlier they start moving, earlier they start exercising, the better the outcome is. And we have also started a post-SARI clinic, which is a twice-a-week clinic. So we are following up patients at 6 weeks after their illness. Any patients with respiratory symptoms, they will have a chest X-ray repeated at 6 weeks. And if the chest X-ray does not show any other alternative diagnosis, we do a lung function test at 6 weeks if they have significant symptoms. And if the lung function test shows significant impairments with exercise desaturation or reduced DLCO, and we consider doing echocardiogram and CT pulmonary angiogram at 4 to 6 weeks. And this is especially important if the patients were given therapeutic anticoagulation while in hospital, but they were not sent home on any other prophylaxis. And then these patients are discussed in our interstitial lung disease MDT, which happens twice a week in our department. After 6 weeks, we continue to follow them at 3 months. Again, we do a chest X-ray and pulmonary function test. And if that chest X-ray and pulmonary function test is stable or improved, then we plan to follow them at 6 months. But in the interim, if there is a deterioration in lung function or chest X-ray findings between 6 weeks and 12 weeks, we plan to do a CT scan, CT pulmonary angiogram as well at this point of time, and then we plan to discuss in ILD MDT. As of now, we are offering pulmonary rehabilitation to such patients. We are not giving any antifibrotic agents because it is not proven that such patients benefit from these agents. I know that many people have started using pirfenidone for post-COVID pulmonary fibrosis, but it is still investigational. We don't know whether it will work or not. And there are at least 4 trials which I came across in the clinicaltrials.gov who are trying these antifibrotics in post-COVID scenario. So till the evidence is sure, we need to give intense pulmonary rehabilitation for our patients who have significant sequelae after recovering from COVID-19 illness. So in conclusion, patients can have significant post-COVID sequelae after they recovered from the acute illness. It can cause significant morbidity, and effective follow-up and pulmonary rehabilitation is what is proven to have a beneficial role in management of